I'm just glad you're safe now. And GT, you saved me. And GT, thank you. And GT, he is the one. We are his to serve. And GT, a human saved one alien girl from a slaver's cage. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't even ask her name until 3 days later. The next week, an entire tribe of alien women stood at his front door. And what they wanted from him would change his life forever. Stick with me because this story has a betrayal you won't see coming. A debt that humans were never supposed to be able to pay. And an ending that proves the slavers picked the wrong species to mess with. Marcus Holt was not a soldier. He was a cargo hauler, not a diplomat. He was a cargo hauler running the outer rim routes on a beat-up freighter called the Iron Magnolia, the kind of ship held together with patches, prayers, and duct tape that cost more than the hull plating. He hauled grain, machine parts, sometimes livestock, and he stayed out of trouble because trouble on the rim usually meant a slow death in the void. That was the plan anyway. The plan fell apart on a docking ring above a backwater moon called Cesset 4, where Marcus saw a cage. It wasn't subtle. Slavers on the rim rarely were because the rim had no real law, just corporations pretending to be governments and governments pretending to care. The cage sat in the open, in a market stall between a noodle vendor and a part stealer, and inside it crouched a girl who wasn't human. Her skin had a faint blue-gray undertone. Her eyes were too large for a human face, slit-pupiled like a cat's, and her ears tapered to points that twitched at every sound in the crowd. She was thin in a way that told Marcus she hadn't eaten well in a long time, and she had a collar around her neck with a blinking red light that meant exactly one thing: obedience or pain. Her choice removed entirely. Marcus had seen slave markets before. Everyone on the rim had. The unwritten rule was simple. You mind your business because slavers had muscle, slavers had connections, and slavers did not take kindly to humans who thought they were heroes. Marcus had followed that rule for 6 years of rim runs. He broke it in about 4 seconds the moment the girl's eyes met his, and he saw something in them that wasn't fear anymore. It was the dead calm of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. That look did something to him. He didn't decide to act. His body just walked toward the cave before his brain finished arguing with itself. How much? He said to the slaver, a thick-necked Viridian with cybernetic eyes and a voice like gravel in a blender. The slaver named a price that would have bought Marcus a new engine core. Marcus didn't blink. He sold his ship's spare parts inventory on the spot, traded away a working backup nav computer, and emptied the credit account he'd been saving for a hull refit. It took everything he had, and it still wasn't quite enough. So he threw in his sidearm too, an old but well-maintained pulse pistol that the slaver eyed with more interest than he should have. The deal closed. The collar came off with a key that cost extra. Marcus walked away from that market with no weapon, no savings, half his spare parts gone, and one alien girl trailing 2 steps behind him, silent, watching him like she was waiting for the catch. There's always a catch with rescues like this, or at least that's what the rim teaches you to expect. So let's pause the action for 1 second, because before we get to the tribe, showing up at his door. You need to understand 3 things that make this story actually matter. First, what this girl actually was, and why slavers wanted her so badly that they tracked her for weeks. Second, why an entire tribe of her people considered Marcus's actions something close to sacred law, the kind of debt that doesn't just get paid back with a thank you. And third, what happened when the slavers realized the merchandise they lost wasn't gone. It just had a very angry human freighter pilot standing between them and her, and decided to come collect what they thought was still theirs. Let's start with who she actually was, because this is where the story stops being a rescue and starts being something much bigger. Her name was Seal, and she came from a species called the Threna, a near-extinct people from a system 3 jumps out from Cesset 4. The Threna weren't extinct because of war or plague or some natural disaster. They were dying because of slavers, the same network that had Seal in that. Threni biology made them valuable on certain black markets. Their blood carried compounds that could be refined into high-grade medical stems, the kind that could save a dying soldier in the field or get a wealthy corporate exec through an illness that should have killed them. A live Thrani was a walking pharmacy, and slaver networks had spent 2 decades hunting down Thrani settlements, capturing whoever they could and either selling them to collectors or harvesting them outright. By the time Marcus found Seal in that the Thrani population across known space had dropped to a few hundred individuals, scattered, hidden, hunted. Seal had been part of a hidden settlement on a moon nobody bothered to map well, one of the last pockets of Thrani trying to live quietly and stay invisible. The slavers found it anyway, because slavers always find a way. Paid informants and bribed station officials and patient surveillance drones that nobody questions until it's too late. The raid took 11 people. Seal was the only one who made it as far as the open market before someone with a conscience intervened. And the someone happened to be a tired cargo hauler who didn't know any of this. When he handed over his life savings, he just saw a scared kid in a cage and decided that wasn't going to be the last thing she ever experienced. That decision was about to matter a lot more than he understood, because the rehook here is simple. The moment Marcus bought Seal's freedom, he didn't just save one alien. He put himself directly between an entire criminal network and the last few breadcrumbs of an entire species. And predators do not let prey wander off when there's profit attached to her blood. Marcus didn't know any of that yet. What he knew was that he had an alien girl on ship who flinched at sudden movement, wouldn't sleep unless a door was locked, and refused to eat anything until she'd watched him eat from the same pot first. He didn't push her to talk. He didn't demand gratitude. He just kept doing normal things loudly and predictably, so she'd learn the rhythm of a person who wasn't going to hurt her. He showed her where the medkit was. He showed her how to lock the cargo bay from the inside. He gave her his own bunk and slept on a folded tarp in the cockpit. And when she finally asked why on the 3rd day, in halting standards she'd clearly learned from forced labor, he just shrugged and said, "You needed a door that locks." I didn't. That was the entire explanation. And GT clears throat. And GT, no speech, no demand for thanks. Just a man treating a stranger's safety as more important than his own comfort. And that quiet consistency is what actually planted the seed for everything that happened next. Here's the thing about debts in 3-9. Culture. And this is point 2. The part that explains why a tribe, not a person, a tribe, eventually showed up at Marcus's door. 3-9 society runs on something they call the Sil Tev, which translates roughly to blood-marked obligation. And it's not casual. It's not a thank you card and a fruit basket. When a 3-9's life is saved by someone who had no obligation to help and asked for nothing in return, that act gets recorded almost ceremonially as a debt the entire community owes, not just the individual who survived. It's rooted in their history as a hunted, fragile population. When your species is this close to disappearing, every single life saved is treated as a miracle. The whole tribe is responsible for honoring, because tomorrow it might be someone else's life on the line. And the precedent has to mean something. Seal didn't tell Marcus any of this for weeks, partly because she still wasn't sure she trusted the universe not to take this safety away again, and partly because she didn't think he'd believe how seriously her people took it. But she did send word. The Thranics had a quiet network of survivors, message runners, hidden comm relays, buried in junk satellites, the kind of underground communication system that only exists because a species has learned the hard way that loud channels get you killed. Seal used that network to send exactly one message to whatever remained of her extended clan. She was alive, she was safe, and the human who freed her had asked for nothing. That message moved through the Thranics diaspora faster than Marcus could have imagined, because a story like that in a community running out of good news spreads like wildfire. Other Thranic survivors heard it. Then their cousins heard it. Then entire scattered pods who hadn't had contact with each other in years heard it and started reorganizing around a single question: who is this human and where is he? That's the rehook for this section, and it's important. While Marcus was just trying to keep his freighter's fuel lines from freezing and figuring out how to teach an alien girl to play cards to pass the time, an entire underground network of the rarest, most hunted species in known space was quietly converging on his location. Not because they wanted to ask for anything, but because in Threnai tradition, when someone honors the Sil Tev, the debt gets repaid whether the human wants it repaid or not. Marcus had no idea a small army of grateful, capable, deeply motivated alien women were already plotting a trip to his exact coordinates. He just thought he'd quietly disappeared into rim space with one rescued girl and a smaller bank account. He was wrong on basically every count. Now let's get to the part you're actually here for. The week everything changed and why this wasn't some sweet, simple gesture of thanks. This is point 3. And it's the part where the story turns dangerous again. Because Marcus wasn't the only one who'd noticed Sil was still alive. The slaver network that lost her wasn't run by some disorganized rim hustler. It was a tendril of a much larger organization, the kind with corporate shell accounts, bribe station security, and bounty contracts that didn't expire just because the merchandise changed hands. when word filtered back up their chain that the Threnai girl from the Cesset 4 raid had been purchased by a human freighter pilot instead of disappearing into a private buyer's collection. That organization didn't shrug it off. Threnai blood was worth too much, and letting one slip away set a bad precedent for their other captives. So they sent someone to fix the problem. A retrieval specialist named Corbin Dask, a bounty broker with a reputation for finishing jobs quietly in a ship fast, enough to make Marcus's freighter look like a parked truck. Corbin tracked the Iron Magnolia through docking records, fuel purchases, and one too many sightings at small-time trade stations, the kind of trail a cargo hauler leaves without ever thinking about it, because cargo haulers don't expect to be hunted. By the time Marcus had settled into a routine with Sile teaching her the ship systems, watching her relax, enough to actually laugh at something he said, Corbin's ship was already 3 jumps behind him and closing. The slavers wanted Sile back, and they wanted Marcus dead as a message to anyone else on the rim who thought playing hero was a good business model. This is the moment the story almost ends badly, so don't get comfortable. Corbin caught up with the Iron Magnolia at a half-abandoned refueling station, orbiting a gas giant called Brennex, the kind of place with 3 working dock clamps and a security system that hadn't been updated in a decade. Marcus had no idea he was being hunted until Corbin's ship locked weapons on his hull the second he disengaged from the fuel line. A clean shot meant to disable, not destroy, because dead pilots don't answer questions about where the merchandise is hiding. Marcus's freighter took a hit across the aft thrusters that knocked out half his maneuvering capability. Alarms screaming through the cockpit. Sile grabbing the back of his chair so hard her knuckles went pale. And for about 10 seconds Marcus genuinely believed this was how it ended. A rim hauler and a rescued girl, both finished off in the dead quiet of a half-empty station because nobody official was watching, and nobody official would care. But here's the re-hook, and it's the one that flips the entire story. Marcus wasn't actually facing this alone, even though he thought he was, because while Corbin Dask was lining up his second shot, 3 other ships dropped out of slip space directly into the station's defense perimeter. And they weren't rim traders. They were retrofitted transport vessels, the kind the Threnai underground network used to move survivors quietly between safe systems. Except these particular 3 had been quietly armed over the years by people who'd learned that staying defenseless gets you killed. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask questions. The moment their sensors confirmed a Threnai survivor was under direct fire, they opened up on Corbin's ship with everything they had. Because the Sile Teb doesn't just mean gratitude. It means the entire tribe shows up when one of their own is threatened. And they had been quietly tailing Corbin's pursuit for 2 full days, waiting for exactly this moment to confirm the threat and strike before he could finish the job. Corbin's ship took critical damage in under a minute. He tried to break off and run, broadcasting some half-hearted threat about contracts and consequences. And one of the Threnai gunners, a woman named Aerith, who would matter a lot more, in about 30 seconds, put a final shot through his drive core that turned his escape attempt into a slow, ugly drift toward the gas giants upper atmosphere, where station traffic control would have a very awkward report to file later about unauthorized debris. Marcus sat in his crippled cockpit, half deaf from alarms, staring at 3 alien warships that had just saved his life. And he had absolutely no idea who they were or why they'd shown up exactly when he needed them most. Now let's get to the part you're actually here for. The week everything changed, and why. This wasn't some sweet, simple gesture of thanks. That brings us to the part everyone's been waiting for. Point 4. The actual week Marcus's life turned upside down, because saving the day apparently wasn't the end of the surprises. It was just the beginning of them. After the fight at Brennick Station, Marcus limped the Iron Magnolia to the nearest safe dock for repairs, towed in part by one of the Threnna ships. And he finally got his first real conversation with the people who just saved his life. Irith, the gunner who'd finished off Corbin's ship, came aboard once docking clamps were secure, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. She looked at Marcus, looked at Sale standing protectively close to him, and said something that Sale translated with visible emotion. "You are the one who paid the debt. Nobody asked you to pay." Marcus, exhausted, half-deaf, and still processing the fact that he'd nearly died twice in one day, said the only thing that felt true. "I just didn't want to leave her in a cage." Irith apparently found that answer more meaningful than any grand speech could have been, because she nodded slowly, like he'd passed some tests he didn't know he was taking, and told him that word would travel. He thought that meant a thank you note, maybe a favor down the line if he ever needed one. He had no idea what word traveling actually meant in Thranai culture. Within a week, while his ship was still in dry dock getting its aft thrusters rebuilt, women started arriving. Not soldiers in formation, not a delegation with paperwork. Just Thranai women, one at a time and then in small groups, showing up at the dock where Marcus was staying, asking for him by name, each one carrying some version of the same message. They had heard what he did. They knew someone in their scattered community who owed their life or their freedom to a chain of events that traced back to his decision at that market stall. And they had come to formally acknowledge the dead in person because, in Thranai tradition, a debt of this size doesn't get settled through a message relay. It gets settled face to face, witness to witness. Every person whose survival connects back to that moment standing in front of the man who started the chain. By the 4th day, there were 19 of them gathered near his docked ship, and Marcus, who had spent 6 years deliberately avoiding any situation that required public speaking, found himself standing in front of nearly 20 alien women who were treating him like he'd done something between a rescue and a miracle. He kept trying to downplay it, kept saying some version of, "I just bought her out of a cage, that's it." And every single time, one of them would explain a piece of the bigger picture he hadn't known. How Sale's survival meant message could go out confirming the S's 4 raids. Last known captive was alive. How that message led other Thranai pods stop searching and start protecting other targets instead. How the ripple of his one decision had already changed the calculus for at least 3 other rescue operations the underground network was running. He hadn't just saved one girl. He'd accidentally become a load-bearing piece of an entire species' survival strategy, and they were not going to let that go unmarked. This is where the story gets its biggest rehook, the one that explains the title you clicked on, because by the end of that week, the tribe didn't just say thank you and leave. They made him an offer that no rim hauler in history had ever been on the receiving end of. Irith, speaking for the gathered group, explained that Thranai's survival now depended on finding protected, hidden places to rebuild, since their old settlements kept getting found, and what they needed wasn't charity, it was partnership. A human ship registered and flying under colors that slaver networks wouldn't immediately flag, captained by someone who had already proven under fire that he wouldn't sell them out when things got dangerous. They weren't asking him to be a hero again. They were asking him to be a permanent part of the only chance their species had left, and they were prepared to bring everything they had, knowledge of hidden safe systems, medical expertise far beyond RIM standard, even a few retrofitted ships of their own, to make that partnership work. Marcus, to his credit, didn't say yes immediately, because saying yes to something that big without thinking it through would have been its own kind of recklessness. He asked questions. He asked what it would actually mean day to day, whether this put a target on his ship permanently, whether Cial even wanted this arrangement, or whether she was just going along with what her community decided. That last question mattered more than anything else he could have asked, and it's worth pausing on, because it's the moment that turns this from tribe rewards human into something with actual heart in it. Cial answered for herself in front of everyone, in standard clear enough that there was no translation gap this time. She said she didn't want to go back to hiding in tunnels and counting days until the next raid. She wanted to stay on a ship with a man who locked her door before he ever asked her name, because that told her more about who he was than any debt ceremony could. That answer settled it for Marcus. He said yes, not because a tribe of grateful alien women showed up demanding repayment, but because somewhere in that chaotic week, a scared girl who used to flinch at sudden movement had become someone who spoke up for herself in front of her entire community, and he realized he wanted to keep being the kind of person who made that possible. The Iron Magnolia got refitted over the following month, not into a warship but into something closer to a mobile safe house. Hidden compartments rebuilt to actual operational standard instead of smuggler hack jobs. Medical bay upgraded with Thranai compatible equipment, defense systems quietly improved by people who clearly knew what they were doing. And GT clears throat. And GT, Marcus kept the captain's chair. He also, somewhat to his own surprise, kept gaining crew, because once word spreads that there's a human willing to fly through an ice survivors to genuinely safe ground and ask nothing in return except that they pull their weight on a working ship, you don't stay short-staffed for long. Here's the last rehook before we close this out, because the story doesn't end with a tidy bow. It ends with consequences for the people who started this. The slaver network that sent Corvin Dask didn't just write off their loss after his ship drifted into a gas giant's atmosphere. They escalated, sending a heavier Retrieval contract a few months later. This time targeting not just Sile, but the entire operation that had clearly formed around protecting her and others like her. That second attempt walked straight into a trap Aerith and Marcus had built together. A fake rendezvous point, a decoy cargo run, and a small fleet of Threnny crewed ships waiting in ambush formation that the slaver crew never saw coming until their sensors lit up with contacts on every side. That fight ended fast, and it ended with a data core full of slaver network contacts, financial routes, and operational locations falling into the hands of people who had every reason in the universe to make that information count. Within the year, 3 more RIM slaving operations tied to the same parent network got quietly dismantled, not by official authorities who'd ignored Threnny disappearances for 2 decades, but by survivors who finally had the resources, the ships, and the human ally willing to help them fight back instead of just hiding. Marcus Holt never set out to become anyone's symbol of anything. And GT clears throat. And GT, he bought a scared girl out of a cage because he couldn't make himself walk past it. And that single decision, made in about 4 seconds, with no plan and no expectation of reward, ended up reshaping the survival odds of an entire species, earning him a tribe's permanent loyalty, and turning a beat-up RIM freighter into the most dangerous ship slavers in that sector could possibly run into. The slavers picked the wrong cage to leave unguarded, and they picked the wrong human to underestimate. If this story hit you right, you already know what kind of stories live on this channel. Humans doing something quietly decent in a galaxy that doesn't expect it, and the universe deciding that decency deserves to be repaid in full. Subscribe if you want more of these, because there's a lot more where this came from, and hit the next video in the corner of your screen if you want to keep going. Right now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.